Carnival of Light is a 13-minute freakout taped by the Beatles during an evening session following a vocal overdub on Penny Lane on January 5th, 1967. An avant-garde piece without beat or key, Carnival of Light was instigated and directed by Paul, 18 months before John's Revolution 9. For this reason, Paul is proud of it, and apparently still hopes for it to be in the public domain. Yet while it establishes his underground credentials ahead of John's, the two are very, very different. For more than a year before the Beatles recorded this track, Paul had been playing at his home in Cavendish Avenue with tape loops and musique concrète, as well as experimenting with montage home movies. Paul at this time was becoming involved in the London underground art scene through his friend Barry Miles, who owned the Indica Gallery and helped start the independent scene newspaper International Times. Through Miles, he knew the music of AMM, the free improvisation group founded in 1965 that often performed in darkness, incorporating randomly scanned broadcasts by playing transistor radios. Paul clearly had this sort of music in mind during the recording of Carnival of Light and A Day in the Life. The major discovery of his interaction with the mid-60s classical and jazz avant-garde was random. The realization that chance elements, with which the Beatles are already casually toyed, could produce interesting results when actively sought after. The difference was that AMM, following the contemporary deal of transcending the ego, specialized in a sensitive form of collective improvisation, in which players not only listened intently to each other, but interacted spontaneously with everything around them, including their audiences. In Carnival of Light, the Beatles merely bashed about at the same time, overdubbing without much thought and relying on the instant artifacts of tape echo to produce something suitably far out.
Right. The thing is, I was asked to do something in the 60s, and I was kind of grooving around London, and the other guys were kind of living out a little bit in the suburbs.
Right.
They'd all got married, so I was just kind of grooving around, and I got asked to do a piece of music for a thing called the Carnival of Light, which is a real sort of hippie thing, man.
Right.
And it was great, you know, and the guy said, you could do anything. So I just went into the studio, before a Beatles session, and when the guys came in, I said, look, can we just have 15 minutes where I'll just organize a little bit of craziness? Is everyone up for it? And the guy said, yeah, sure, you know. So I said, okay, well, just wander around and just hit anything you want, just say anything you want, just play a bit ding on the piano,
right,
or go on the drums, or say,
avant-garde music. Yes.
Avant-garde.
Yes.
As George used to call it, avant-garde a clue.
Yeah.
So I said, well, we'll just do this for 15 minutes, and then that's me covered. I'll give it to the guy. We'll put a lot of echo on it.
Right.
It was a bit of nonsense, really, Jeff Emerick said. But everyone had fun doing it. Whenever the Beatles tried something really outrageous, George Martin would roll his eyes and mutter a clipped, "Oh my God," under his breath. Looking back, I guess that everyone was just tripping their brains out that night, but we didn't know it then. When John started shouting repeatedly in one of his goon-like voices, Phil and I were doubled over in laughter. When they had finished, George Martin said to me, "This is ridiculous. We've got to get our teeth into something more constructive." Mark Lewison, who was personally allowed to listen to the song in 1987, while compiling his book The Complete Beatles Recording Sessions, lists the multi-track tape contents as distorted, hypnotic drum and organ sounds, a distorted lead guitar, various indescribable sound effects with heaps of echo and manic tambourine, the sounds of a church organ, various effects, water gargling was one, and voices, perhaps most intimidating of all, John and Paul screaming dementedly and bawling aloud random phrases like, "Are you all right? Barcelona!" Lewison also said that fans would be disappointed once they hear the track. Others who have heard the song, such as Barry Miles, compared it to Frank Zappa's The Return of the Son of the Monster Magnet, the closing song from the album Freak Out. Paul himself said that Freak Out was a big influence on Sgt. Pepper. According to the biographer Philip Norman, during the recording sessions, Paul would repeatedly say, "This is our Freak Out!" All in all, it would be unfair to expect anything much more considered, given that, unlike Revolution 9, which was carefully crafted for the White Album and took 5 days to finish, Carnival of Light was knocked off quickly as an informal commission for a mixed media event held on the 28th of January and the 4th of February 1967 at the Roundhouse Theatre in Camden Town, North London. Organized by a trio of then voguish underground artists, Doug Binder, Dudley Edwards, and Dave Vaughan, the Carnival of Light rave was a genuine countercultural happening, a gathering of the English heads 3 months before the larger and better remembered 14-hour Technicolor Dream at Alexandra Palace in Motswell Hill. For the carnival, the inside of the Roundhouse was turned into an environment by being draped in sheets for light shows. As at the Technicolor Dream and similar hippie events, the audience wandered amid art objects and installations as films were projected and music was performed. Personally delivered to Binder, Edwards, and Vaughan on quarter-inch tape by Paul, the Beatles soundtrack to these proceedings was played several times during both evenings. Retrospective reports of Carnival of Light from those present in the event have been negative or dismissive. Brian Hodgson from Unit Delta Plus described the track as all rather a mess. There seemed to be no coherence to what was on the tape. David Allen from the band Soft Machine, who also performed at the event, recalled that he dimly remembers the sound collage because it was not particularly memorable. He, Paul, had obviously improved a bit by the time Sgt. Pepper was made. Decades later, Paul tried to have it released in 1996 for Anthology 2, although George reportedly voted against it, allegedly saying that he didn't like avant-garde music. In the same year, Paul also claimed that he had been working on a photo collage film for which he intended to use Carnival of Light in the soundtrack, although the project has never been seen, and the last time he spoke of it was in 2002. Paul has confirmed that he was indeed still in possession of the master tapes and was still eager to release them, saying that he felt as though the time has come for it to get its moment. I like it because it's the Beatles free, going off-piste. Although he also said that such a release would require consent from the group's estate, John's widow Yoko, and George's widow Olivia, as well as Ringo. Was he barred from releasing it by the group's estate? Did he change his mind and feel it would be better left buried? Who knows?
Now, because the Beatles was such a big thing, it now is of interest.
Right.
But, you know, I meet people at like my kid's school. There's like a nice dinner lady there who I chat to. She said, ooh, new Beatles music, 15 minutes. Ooh. I said, I don't think you'd like it.
Right. Nobody might
It's
like
not
it.
what you're thinking it is.
Right.
It's kind of, hey, about you. Oh, whoop, 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 whoop.
But you were willing to let it out there, but
Cool.
George was against it.
You know what I thought it might be good on the anthology.
Right.
Where we were putting everything out. It was like every old bootleg we'd ever done. And I thought that might be an interesting part of the kind of 60s story.
Based on all of the testimonies of those who have heard it, I predict that it's just not a really interesting or memorable avant-garde piece. Indeed, listening to this obscure treasure would be fascinating. But aside from its historical relevance, I think it could be a letdown after all the buzz around it. For various reasons, it'll probably never be released. Although it may, of course, leak one day.
See, I think I've got like a certain personality, and if I know I get into avant-garde stuff, I don't particularly shout, hey, you know what I'm into now, avant-garde stuff. I just kind of do it and get on with it. So, way before John met Yoko and got avant-garde, I was like the avant-garde London bachelor with Miles, my pad in St. John's Wood. I was making like 8mm movies, showing them to Antonioni. And that was pretty far out stuff, you know. But, you know, I had a lot of this, and John used to come from Weybridge, kind of looking slightly goofy, and kind of think, wow, you know, great, that's great, we should do more of this. But I always had this sort of attitude of, well, you know, I am sort of what I am, and this is me just learning and getting. But I mean, it never really came out about me. When John went avant-garde, you knew about it.
Was that because he was a self-publicist, or was it just that happened?
No, he's just enthusiasm for whatever he was doing. John was very upfront. I'm not as upfront. I'm just a different personality. You know, it just doesn't occur to me to tell people everything I'm doing. But it didn't occur to me, the next Enemy interview I did, to say, hey, have you heard William Burroughs, man? He's in town, and he's writing the greatest avant-garde. You know, maybe it would have been good for me to do that. I don't know.